What if I told you that your entire struggle in life comes from a single misunderstanding? You see, we've been taught that life is something to be conquered, a series of obstacles to overcome. But here's the thing. What if the very act of fighting against reality is precisely what prevents us from truly living? Think about it. The more desperately you try to swim against the current, the more exhausted you become. You're not meant to conquer the river. You're meant to become it. This paradox sits at the heart of our deepest suffering, and yet contains within it the key to our liberation. Imagine yourself in that river, arms thrashing wildly against the powerful current. Every muscle tenses as you struggle to maintain control. Your lungs burn. Your limbs grow heavier with each desperate stroke. This is not just physical exhaustion. This is the exhaustion of your very being. And for what purpose? To resist what simply is. The river flows regardless of your approval or objection. Yet we keep fighting. We keep swimming upstream until we collapse from exhaustion, only to find ourselves carried along anyway, but now too depleted to experience the journey. You see, this is the great cosmic joke we play on ourselves every day. We exhaust our precious life energy resisting the very flow that could carry us to where we need to go. But here's the thing about surrender. We've misunderstood it completely. We think surrender means defeat, weakness, giving up. What if surrender is actually the ultimate form of strength? What if the ability to release control is not weakness, but the most profound expression of wisdom? Think about the willow tree that bends with the wind and survives the storm, while the rigid oak that refuses to yield eventually breaks. Why do we resist reality so fiercely? Is it because we've been conditioned to believe that control equals success? Or perhaps it's something deeper, like our fear of the unknown? Let me tell you about someone I knew many years ago. A brilliant man by conventional standards with advanced degrees and impressive career. Yet he lived in perpetual struggle, constantly fighting against circumstances, people, even time itself. He would rage against traffic, become furious at weather, and hold grudges against those who failed to meet his expectations. When I saw him near the end of his life, he didn't speak of accomplishments. He spoke of exhaustion and regret for moments lost to unnecessary struggle. Now, I'm not saying we should become passive observers of our own lives. But there are three fundamental misconceptions that keep us trapped in this futile struggle against reality. First, our compulsion to control everything around us, from other people to circumstances beyond our influence. We expend enormous energy trying to bend the world to our preferences rather than working skillfully within its natural flow. Second, we mistake our thoughts about reality for reality itself. We create elaborate mental maps and then become distressed when the territory doesn't match them perfectly. We live in our interpretations rather than in direct experience. Third, and perhaps most significantly, we have forgotten our true nature. We see ourselves as separate entities fighting against a foreign universe, rather than expressions of that universe itself. How can the wave fight the ocean when it is the ocean? You see how absurd this becomes when we look at it clearly? It's like the left hand fighting with the right, not recognizing they belong to the same body. We humans are remarkably clever at creating our own suffering through these misunderstandings. Think about it. How much of your stress comes from resisting what already is? From wishing people were different, circumstances were different, even wishing you yourself were different. It's like standing on the shore screaming at the tide to stop coming in. The tide is unmoved by your objection, but you become hoarse, frustrated, and miss the beauty of the shoreline. But here's the thing. This isn't about resignation or giving up. It's about understanding the difference between what you can change and what you cannot, and finding the wisdom to know the difference. It's about recognizing when you're exhausting yourself in battles that cannot be won by fighting. Let's explore these misunderstandings more deeply. First, let us look more closely at our compulsion to control everything around us. This urge runs so deep that most of us rarely question it. We believe happiness comes from arranging the world to match our preferences. If only other people would behave correctly. If only circumstances would align properly. Then we could finally be at peace. But what if I told you that this approach is fundamentally backward? The world contains infinite variables beyond our influence. Consider the seasons. The winter never arrives because the autumn leaves demanded it. The spring never blooms because someone commanded the flowers to open. There is a natural unfolding that occurs without any need for our supervision. The rain falls, the wind blows, the earth turns. They will continue with or without our approval. They will continue regardless of our resistance. They will continue following patterns far more ancient than our momentary preferences. You see, when we fixate on controlling the uncontrollable, we place ourselves in perpetual conflict with reality itself. How many times have you been upset because someone didn't behave according to your expectations? This isn't occasional disappointment. For many, this is a constant state of being, a chronic condition of resistance against what simply is. Let me tell you something about control. True control is not about forcing reality to conform to our wishes. It's about skillful navigation within reality as it actually exists. It's the difference between trying to stop a river from flowing and learning to steer your boat within its current. The first is impossible. The second is mastery. But here's the thing. Our control compulsion doesn't just create unnecessary struggle. It blinds us to the astonishing beauty and opportunities present in what is actually happening. When we're fixated on how things should be different, we miss what is. Now let us explore the second great misunderstanding. We mistake our thoughts about reality for reality itself. We confuse the map for the territory, the menu for the meal, the description for the experience. Think about it. Right now, you are not experiencing the world directly. You are experiencing your interpretation of the world, your thoughts about what is happening, your mental commentary, your judgments and evaluations. These aren't reality. They are representations of reality, filtered through your particular conditioning and beliefs. When we are wholly identified with our thinking, we suffer unnecessarily. We take personally what isn't personal. We react to our interpretations rather than to what's actually occurring. Let me tell you something about thoughts. They are not commands you must obey. They are not accurate representations of reality. They are mental events arising and passing in consciousness. They will come. They will go. They will transform. Their nature is movement, not solidity. What if I told you that freedom isn't having different thoughts, but having a different relationship to thought itself? What if you could observe your thinking rather than being completely identified with it? This shift in perspective changes everything. It's the difference between being swept away by a river and standing on the bank, watching it flow. This identification with thought creates a kind of hypnosis where we live in conceptual realities rather than in direct experience. And from this trance state, we try to control the uncontrollable, creating even more suffering for ourselves and others. The two misunderstandings feed each other in an endless cycle of unnecessary struggle. But here's the thing about waking up from this trance. It doesn't require years of meditation or special techniques, though these can certainly help. It begins with a simple noticing. Noticing that you are not your thoughts. Noticing the difference between direct experience and conceptual overlay. Noticing the space of awareness in which all experience, including thinking, appears. Finally, we come to the third and perhaps most profound misunderstanding that keeps us in perpetual conflict with reality. We believe ourselves to be separate from the universe we inhabit. We experience ourselves as isolated entities peering out at a foreign world rather than expressions of that world itself. This fragmentation creates the fundamental illusion that there is a separate you that could somehow be in opposition to reality. Think about it. Where exactly does your body end and the world begin? Is the air in your lungs part of you or part of the environment? It moves freely between both. The food you ate yesterday has become your cells today. Your very thoughts arise from a vast network of influences beyond what you call yourself. You see, we are both individual and universal simultaneously. This is the great paradox of existence. You are uniquely you, with your particular perspective and experience. And simultaneously, you are an expression of the entire cosmos, inseparable from the vast web of being. Like a wave is both distinctly itself and completely ocean at the same time. Let me tell you about a man I knew years ago, a successful businessman who lived entirely within the paradigm of separation. He saw himself as fundamentally different from and often in opposition to the world around him. Then, during a severe illness that left him bedridden for months, he began to notice how dependent he was on everything he had considered not himself. The air he breathed, the food others prepared for him, the countless people involved in his medications. He realized that the boundary he had placed between himself and the world was arbitrary and ultimately fictional. He was not separate from reality. He was reality expressing itself as him. This realization did not diminish his individuality. It contextualized it within something vast and interconnected. He still acted purposefully in the world, but now from alignment rather than opposition, from participation rather than control, from flow rather than resistance. You see, when we recognize our non-separation from reality, fighting against what is becomes as absurd as the right hand fighting the left. The alternative to this struggle is not passive resignation, but aligned participation. It is engagement with life from a place of fundamental acceptance of what is, combined with clear intention about what could be. But here's the thing about this aligned participation. It requires a radical surrender of the ego's demand that reality conform to its preferences. Not a surrender of action or purpose, but of the insistence that life should be other than it is in this moment. It is saying yes to reality before attempting to transform it. It is accepting the starting point of now in order to move skillfully toward what could be. What does this look like in practice? Rather than asking, how can I get reality to conform to my wishes, we ask, how can I align my actions with what is actually happening? Think about it. When you resist the present moment, you place yourself in opposition to the only point of contact you have with reality. You reject the only place from which effective action is possible. But when you fully accept what is, without conflating acceptance with approval, you gain access to tremendous clarity and power. What if, instead of arguing with reality, you could align with its flow while directing it through your conscious intention? Like a kayaker who accepts the river current completely while skillfully steering within it. Let me give you a concrete example. When facing a difficult conversation with someone, The separate self resists reality by wishing the other person were different, by rejecting their perspective, by trying to control the outcome. This creates tension, defensiveness, and usually poor results. The non-separate self approaches differently. It accepts completely that the other person is exactly as they are in this moment. It recognizes them as part of the same reality, not an obstacle to it. From this acceptance, it engages skillfully, without the friction of resistance, without the distortion of rejection. The conversation unfolds differently because one participant has stopped fighting against what is. You see how this applies to the river metaphor we began with? When you stop exhausting yourself by swimming against the current, you can begin to flow with it. You conserve your energy. You move more quickly and easily. You can steer your course within the flow, rather than trying vainly to stop or redirect the river itself. This flowing with reality applies to everything: your body and its sensations, your emotions as they arise and pass, your thoughts as they appear in consciousness, the behavior of others, circumstances beyond your control. When you stop fighting against any of these, you discover a profound freedom and effectiveness that was previously unimaginable. What if you experimented with this perspective today? What if, the next time you notice yourself in conflict with reality, you paused and asked, "What would change if I fully accepted this moment exactly as it is, not resigned to it, not giving up on positive change, but simply acknowledging what is before attempting to influence what could be?" When you stop fighting reality and start living in harmony with it, something remarkable happens. The boundary between what you want and what is begins to dissolve. Not because you abandon your desires, but because those desires arise from a deeper alignment with reality rather than in opposition to it. Your will and the universal will begin to move in greater harmony. There's a profound freedom in this. Freedom from the exhaustion of needless struggle. Freedom from the suffering of constant opposition. Freedom to engage with life fully and effectively from a place of acceptance rather than resistance. I understand the profound challenge of what we've been exploring together. This wisdom runs counter to much of our conditioning. Our entire culture celebrates the hero who fights against all odds, who bends reality through sheer force of will. We rarely honor the sage who aligns with reality, who flows with life rather than against it. Let us revisit the 3 misunderstandings we've explored. We compulsively try to control what cannot be controlled, exhausting ourselves in futile struggles. We mistake our thoughts about reality for reality, confusing our maps for the territory, and then wondering why we feel lost. And perhaps most fundamentally, we experience ourselves as separate from the universe we inhabit, creating an illusory boundary that allows us to imagine we could somehow be in opposition to what is. These misunderstandings aren't separate issues, but different facets of a single confusion. They reinforce each other in an interlocking pattern that keeps us trapped in unnecessary suffering. Our sense of separation fuels our need for control. Our identification with thought maintains our sense of separation. Our compulsion to control intensifies our identification with thought. But here's the thing. The integrated truth beneath all these misunderstandings is both simple and profound. We cannot fight reality and truly live simultaneously. Every moment spent in resistance is a moment lost to actual living. Every ounce of energy expended swimming upstream is energy unavailable for experiencing the journey. Think about it. When you stop struggling against the current of life, you don't drown. You float. You don't lose your ability to steer your course. You enhance it by working with the flow rather than against it. I used to believe I needed to struggle against life to get anywhere. I used to think accepting reality meant giving up. What if my resistance is precisely what keeps me from the flow that would carry me where I need to go? What if acceptance is the beginning of transformation, not the end of it? What if letting go is how I finally start to live? You see how this internal dialogue shifts? It moves from opposition to curiosity, from resistance to openness, from struggle to possibility. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about passive resignation. This isn't about accepting injustice or avoiding necessary change. This is about understanding the paradoxical truth that effective action comes from alignment with what is, not from resistance to it. Where are you still fighting reality in your life right now? Where are you exhausting yourself in struggles that cannot be won through opposition? Look closely at your relationships. Look at how you relate to circumstances beyond your control. And most importantly, look at your relationship with yourself. What if I told you that the door to freedom is not locked, that it has been open all along? This is not a freedom that must be achieved through struggle. It is a freedom already available when struggle ceases. The river of reality continues to flow. All that has changed is your relationship to it. You are no longer fighting against the current. You are in the river, aligned with its movement, steering your course within its power, experiencing the journey rather than merely surviving it. The paradox we began with now reveals its deeper wisdom. The very act of fighting against reality is precisely what prevents us from truly living. And the counterintuitive truth that sets us free is this: when we stop fighting against what is, we don't lose our power to create change. We discover a deeper, more effective power that was available all along, the power of aligned participation in the flow of life itself. You see, this is the ultimate liberation. Not freedom from reality, but freedom with reality. Not escape from what is, but complete engagement with it. Not control over life, but surrendered participation in its unfolding. Now, in this very moment, you have a choice. Will you continue the exhausting struggle against what is? Or will you experiment with a different way of being? The river flows regardless. How you relate to it determines whether you experience it as struggle or as dance, as opposition or as flow, as exhaustion or as joy. Let go, accept, align, participate, live,